So when I was thinking about the sermon, and of course, Jacob, Esau, all of the fighting and carrying on between the two brothers, I received a phone call from a friend of mine who talked to me about the challenges that he was having. And this is a friend who usually has lots of stuff going on. He, like me, has ADHD, and usually there's something happening. And this time, honestly, at some point during the conversation, I was just nodding or saying at the appropriate moments. Shh, don't tell him I said that. And finally, as we were talking and listening, and I was listening to him and reflectively listening, I said, maybe if you slowed down, instead of like getting at 6 o'clock and realizing you haven't prepared anything for dinner, like planning out the day before and kind of figuring out what you might need and when you might need it may help cut down on some of the drama. And we talked some more and then hung up the phone, and it got me thinking, how much do we make our own drama? How many times do we do things that we are adding in, causing spiciness to happen around us, and then like in that moment of extreme spiciness, we also have a little bit of fear and doubt and wonderment. So Jacob, shockingly, created a situation with Esau, right? He was not the best brother. He did not allow, he stole the first blessing. He stole a second blessing from his father. He manipulated the situation about who was going to do what regarding the food. He then went off to Laban, and we can kind of see how Jacob was a trickster over there. And so you start to see a pattern of behavior of Jacob trying to trick people for his benefit. Mind you, God had, when he had that dream a few chapters ago, had promised him divine protection, promised him everything would be okay, and yet Jacob almost instinctually felt compelled to be the trickster and try to play jokes. And so what I was connecting with my friend with the ADHD was, how much is Jacob just somewhat insecure? How much is he having doubts? And how much is he causing a lot of this to happen in the first place? Obviously, things may have been totally different for him if he hadn't caused the strife in the first place. And so when we get to this week's Parsha, Vayigash, here we find Jacob being confronted with 400 plus or minus individuals from Esau's tribe. Thank you, Jerry. You're awesome. Esau's tribe. And he divides them up. And he says one group over here, one group over there. And we can almost feel the fear coming out of him, to the point that it even describes in Genesis with two different words. And whenever you see the Bible using two different words to describe a similar feeling, that is a treasure trove for the rabbis, who had a whole orgy of excitement dissecting those two words of fear and doubt and really contemplating it. And my summary of that was in my notes, which is on my counter. But essentially, they all come around and start to question if this person, Jacob, really felt the blessing and protection from God. Why is he still fearful? And then it goes further in the commentary and a little bit further in the book of Genesis, where we read that he's alone at the river of Jabbok. Totally alone. The Bible is very clear about emphasizing that. And how do we know that Jacob's alone? Because he's wrestling with somebody. So Hosea was the first one to do some intertextual commentary for us and say, probably an angel. But the rabbis, connecting earlier with the fear, believed it to be some inner psychological things that he was struggling with, his own deepest fears, his shadow self in Jungian terms. And the idea here is that as he's wrestling, at least in my mind this week, it was because he put himself in that situation of deepest, because he had almost set everything into motion, that he arrived at that point where he pretty much ignored that God promised him everything and really had to wrestle with who he was, his strengths and his weaknesses, without a mask on, really just there himself in the most vulnerable state you could possibly imagine. And finally at that moment, he had the courage to change. Because we see that he walks away from that moment. He's changed. Not only is his name changed, that's the most obvious external version of it, but that's that moment where we see that he becomes the patriarch of who we are. We see that shift in what it means to be a leader. At the close of my sermon that's sitting on my counter, I brought in a brilliant term about leadership and the need for vulnerable leadership to happen. So just, it's there. But really the idea that I brought in at the end was our leaders, for them, sometimes they also create crazy situations we all have to walk through and live through, not through our own doing. But what we learn too through Jacob, both on a group, community level and an individual level, is that through being truly vulnerable, and even if we create those crazy, dramatic, traumatic situations, we can still grow and heal from them, become whole, more better ourselves, and create more healing and wholeness around. Shabbat Shalom.